Hey, hey, that's right. We're here live and direct with first podcast, and I'm happy to say that I have a couple of heavyweights here with me today, and we're going to do our best to not only provide some insight to you, the listeners, and those of you that are going to reach out to us on social media, but we want to educate you as well on certain topics and issues that we find to be relevant in today's time. Now, my name is Gregory McCord. I am a 30-year plus educator. I have spent my time in both Georgia and South Carolina educating young people and molding young minds, but also working with adults. And so I wanted to kick off my first podcast by staying true to my core, because I'm an educator at heart and I'll always be an educator at heart. However, now that I'm not necessarily in the educational arena, there will be times when I'll transition into topics that would not consider to be, I guess, topical in my past arena. And so I'll call those topics after dark. But to kick off today's show, I'm going to start off by letting everyone see my panel guests. Here I have with me Dr. J.R. Green. Dr. J.R. Green is a former superintendent of Fairfield County School District here in South Carolina. He's also a former superintendent of the year. Dr. J.R. Green recently retired, and so he has what I call transition over to my side of life, and that is not necessarily having to watch everything I say because we're outside of the bubble. And so I wanted Dr. Green to be able to come in and espouse a little bit, and we'll have some back and forth banter, I'm sure. But without further ado, let me introduce Dr. J.R. Green. Dr. Green, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you represent moving forward past education.
Well, I appreciate the invitation, Brother McCoy. As you said, I am the recently retired superintendent of schools in Fairfield County after spending 12 years in that role. And I always tell people that you have to measure superintendent years like dog years. And so 12 years is equivalent to about 98 years. And so I am a old man in the superintendency. Contrary to what you just alluded to, I didn't need to retirement to give me the license to say anything I wanted to say. I was saying anything I wanted to say before retirement. And so retirement hadn't changed a thing. I'll continue to speak truth to power. And so it is a pleasure being here today. You and I have lots of conversation offline about a myriad of topics. And now we get an opportunity to do it in the public eye.
Now, I do want to go back and correct you on something, Gerald, because you said you always speak your mind, and I don't disagree with that. But there are some times now I know when you might, to me, say, you can kiss my ass. I don't think you would necessarily say that out in the public and for the public to hear. So, again, being in this space, in this arena, you kind of have freedom and flexibility to do and say some things that you didn't have when you were superintendent, when you were principal, when you were administrator, et cetera, et cetera. Being that this is an endeavor for me that I'm not quite familiar, I wanted to seek out someone that I consider to be one of the best. And when I say I consider, I'm not the only one. She has the top rated radio and TV show in the, I call it the, what do you call it? The metro area, the metropolitan area of South Carolina, which is the capital city here in South Carolina. But I have with us On Point with Cynthia Pryor Hardy. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Cynthia Hardy, because, again, I reached out to you to ask you, hey, give me some insight as to what I might be able to do and what I might be able to offer. But I want you to tell everyone a little bit about who you are and how you got to be where you are.
Oh, thank you, Dr. McCord. You know, I'm sitting over here laughing at you and JR because I have the opportunity to hear you all banter from time to time. And so I was excited to accept the invitation to be here today and also to be a part of your inaugural podcast, your inaugural show. I think that our community could benefit very much so from the insight that you will bring to education topics, but also I'm looking forward to those after dark topics as well, because I know that you think a lot about a lot of different things, and so I'm looking forward to that. So I've been in media for a long time. I started my career in media as a college student. When I was my junior year in college, I was tapped by the radio station in my hometown of Birmingham, Alabama, to be the morning drive news person. And so that was my first endeavor in media. After about 9 months, I got a call from the news director at the ABC station there, television station, and they were looking for African American talent. And so he gave me a little bit of advice here and there about inflection and things like that. And after a while, I went to work for them. I worked there for 7 years as a reporter at WBRC TV6 in Birmingham. And when it didn't happen for me as quickly as I wanted to, the anchoring piece of that, I decided I wanted to try my hand, you all, at public relations. And that's what led me to South Carolina. I took a job with the Urban League in South Carolina. I had worked with Jesse Jackson's 1988 campaign.
Jesse Jackson.
Jesse.
That's a long time ago.
A long time ago, but it whet my appetite for public relations because I consider myself a better writer than speaker, and I felt like I wanted to use my writing skills in a space that would help African American people, quite frankly. And so I started looking around and came upon the National Urban League. And the National Urban League had an affiliate in Columbia, South Carolina. My brother had just been transferred to Columbia, South Carolina. So I came to town and met J.T. McLawhorn, and he was in the mood to hire a media person. And so I went to work for him, and I worked there for more than 15 years, designing programs and being the spokesperson for the agency, and also responsible for the PR, the image of the agency in the community. After a while there, I decided to go work for my late husband, James Hardy, and I went to work for Maxim Communications Group, and that gave me a different kind of feel for things because Jimmy worked with big clients. He had the lottery marketing account, he had several large accounts, and he had National Kappa Alpha Psi account, and so he had a lot of large accounts, and so this gave me the opportunity to work directly with clients, which was really new for me. And so in 2004, when the flag would not come off the State House dome, we decided we wanted to have a voice. And so we pitched an idea to own our own independent media products. And we pitched to several places, but the only radio station I wanted to go to was the Big DM because of their huge reach. The Big DM covers 85% of the state parts of Georgia and North Carolina. And so that has given us a lot of groundwork there. But what it has enabled me to do is to have people on the show like the two of you guys, experts in our community that can bring intelligent talk to African American people. Now, it doesn't mean that I don't want other listeners. I do. And we have them. We have tremendous crossover. But they will tell you, they tune in to hear what African American people are thinking. And we have such a wonderful listening audience. At any given time, any of the people in the audience could come and sit in the chairs where our guests sit because so many policymakers and other experts routinely listen to the show. I've been doing the show, and I've gotten a text from Dr. J.R. Green. You need to say this, Cynthia. You need to say that. The same thing from you, Gregory McCord. So I know that we have policymakers and influencers that listen to our show, and we're fortunate that this is our 20th year. So thank you again.
Well, we're excited about having you here and excited about having you join us today to kind of mediate a little bit between the two of us. Dr. Green, if I can, I want you to expound a little bit about what led you to believe that you could become a superintendent. But before you do, I want to go back to a time when we first met, standing on the stairs of Eau Claire High School. I believe it was 2001. And back then, I was the original Mr. Bowtie. I think you'll acknowledge that because of the fact that we had the Bowtie Club.
So wait, you guys were at the same school?
No, we weren't at the same school. We were in the same district. And so,
Okay.
I reached out because I saw him on the other side doing good work, and I imagine he probably felt the same way. And so we had to have a come to minds one day during the summer of 2001, I believe it to be. And we've been great friends since. But I do recall back back in that summer of 2001, we, standing on the stairs, talked about our futures and what we wanted to do in education. I remember vividly about us both sharing that we wanted to one day hold the title and position of superintendent, but not for the reasons that some would think. In today's time, we hear a lot about teacher pay or lack of teacher pay. Not one time I think we ever talked about money and what money meant.
Oh, wow.
But we talked mostly about what we might be able to do as far as impacting larger audiences. So if you don't mind sharing a little bit about, if you can recall, I'm a little bit older than you, but my memory is good.
Yeah, your memory's better than mine, apparently.
Let me see how good you are.
Yeah, your memory is apparently a lot better than mine, Greg. But you are right. You and I were both assistant principals in Richland 1 during that time. I was at Keenan High School, and
Wow.
and you were at Eau Claire High School. And
Go Shamrocks.
and in fact, that might have been the same summer that I was principal of summer school at Eau Claire High School.
You were.
And so at that time, Richland 1 had a single site that all students in the districts had to attend summer school. And so I was fortunate enough to serve as principal that year, and it was housed on your site at Eau Claire High School. And as you said,
Which concerned me, by the way, but go ahead.
I don't know why that would concern you.
It concerned me because,
I don't know.
even though I was new, I was still on campus, and then they bring, who is this guy they're bringing in to run summer school? But go ahead with the story. Go ahead.
We won't elaborate on that, but you know, as you said, you know, as I thought about my future in the field of education, I really looked at it through the lens of how can I have the greatest impact, and not necessarily how can I reap the greatest reward. And you know, as a teacher, you have the opportunity to impact a certain number of students based on who comes across your door, or who you may meet in the hallways, or who you may interact with through clubs and organizations. But as an assistant principal, you have opportunity to impact even more. As a principal, you have the opportunity to impact even more. And so as I thought about it through that lens, I thought about how many people I could impact if I were in the role of the superintendency, and how I could drive really innovative and creative visions relative to what I wanted to see transpire in the field of education. And so my career, Greg, has been marked by blazing new paths.
Wow.
And so when people say to me, JR, that's never been done before, my response is always, well, somebody has to do it. Why not me? And so someone has to be the first. Rather, it is pursuing what we recently launched in terms of the Teacher Village in Fairfield County. Years ago, when I initially, in 2012, launched the Fairfield County School District STEM Early College Academy, where our young people were going to be earning associate's degrees in science from Midlands Technical College. I had lots of people to tell me, I've not seen that happen before. Are you sure that your young people are ready? Are you sure that the college is going to embrace it? But now, as I look back, virtually everyone has early college initiatives.
Right.
And so, I relish the opportunity to be a trailblazer. And not that you can't do those same things in other capacities, but obviously you have much greater latitude when you're sitting in the seat of the superintendency.
Thank you so much, and I agree with you 100%. You know, my time as superintendent was just under 4 years in Marlboro County, and I enjoyed myself. However, there came a time for an end, and I think many times when we enter into these roles, we know inevitably there's going to be an end. Now, you were one of the trendsetters in so many ways as it relates to bucking the trend, so to speak, because you extended your stay. The average lifespan of a superintendent is 3 to 5 years, not just here in South Carolina, but across the country.
It's a hard job.
It's a very hard job, a lot of demands, a lot of people want to be satisfied. And by the way, when you're trying to satisfy people, you will always fall short. And that's why I think brothers like myself and JR and others always sought out to do what was best for young people. How could we impact young people? But knowing that JR was able to extend his stay for about 12 years always gives me great pride in knowing that it can be done. I also want to state that education right now is in a serious flux. You mentioned that it's a hard job. I believe it's a tougher job today than it has ever been because of the political climate. And so, Cynthia, you've had recent guests on your show to talk about the current state of education. What are your thoughts as you prepare for this upcoming fall political season as it relates to education and those that might be running?
There are just so many issues with regards to education that we really need to pay attention to. JR mentions his teacher village. Well, that's the affordable housing issue within itself. And it's difficult on teacher salary, even though it's up. And JR, you led the way with incentivizing your educators very early on. It was the talk of the town when you were given money to incentivize them to come back. Now everybody is doing it. But the point I'm making in that is that when you do a teacher village the way you did with the affordable housing, it says to teachers not only that you appreciate them, but it also underscores the problem that they have in terms of finding suitable housing for a profession such as theirs, because the teaching profession is one that really should be revered. And unfortunately it is not. So when you do something like that, it goes a long way with the esteem issue. On yesterday, the State Board of Education finally put a policy out in reference, and let me just say this so that we can put it in context of the day of the date. On September 4th, 4th, the State Department of Education put out a new policy, new cell phone ban policy. So that means that every district can now either adopt that one or do something else themselves, and they say it's from bell to bell. And so because there was a lot of concern about whether or not some of the bus drivers were going to have to police the kids on their cell phones and things like that. I see it's a trend that's happening around the country. And so we'll see how that goes. It seems to me that puts a lot of pressure on the staff inside of the school.
It does, and it will. And I don't want any additional undue pressure actually to be put on administrators or teachers or staff and all of that. So hopefully we will be able to come to some sort of resolution where it can exist. One of the things that the current superintendent of education for the state indicated is that it will be helpful for the mental health of children. And that leads me to the next thing that we really should be paying attention to. And that's the worldly issues and where our worldly issues impact the children that are in front of the educators each and every day. We don't give our kids enough grace for what they have to deal with each and every day in terms of their environment. And I can't imagine all of the images that are bombarding them daily just through the social media itself. So for them to have to make good grades, stay on time, make good decisions when it comes to growing up and being a teenager, we're asking a lot of kids. We're asking a lot of staff. So I'm curious, JR, what your thoughts are on it, but I do think it was an overreach of authority by the current state superintendent of education, Ellen Weaver, to enact such a policy. Because to me, I think it usurps the authority of the local school boards.
Can I ask a question there, Gregory, of you and of JR? I understand she pushed for it, but it only could have happened if the proviso had been included in the state budget. So is what we're saying that the state superintendent of education influenced the lawmakers or asked them to do it?
I wouldn't be surprised if that were not the case, but if we're not careful, I think this is just the tip of the iceberg, because now you have a proviso in place that's tied to funding, saying that if it's tied to funding, whereas in the past, I don't know, JR, I might be wrong, I can't recall too many that were necessarily tied to funding.
I've never seen one like that.
Well, just for clarification, Greg, a proviso is explicitly a budget bill.
Right.
So a proviso is just 1 year law that is tied to the state budget. So any proviso that exists is tied to the state budget.
And they have to renew it every year?
It has to be renewed every year.
Okay.
And so
thank you.
the irony in a proviso is that once they are implemented, they never tend to come out. Okay, and so even though it's 1 year law, unless someone goes through the process of taking the proviso out, it just is renewed in the budget every year following. And so it becomes basically permanent law. that does not have to go through the normal process of subcommittee and committee, getting properly vetted, getting the kind of attention and feedback that a normal law would get. And so it may surprise people, but as much respect as I have for State Superintendent Ellen Weaver, I disagree with her perspective on a statewide ban. It may surprise people that I disagree, because Fairfield County was probably one of the first districts in the state of South Carolina to implement a yonder pouch policy at our secondary school.
Oh, you had yonder pouches?
Yeah, so we've had yonder pouches for 5 or 6 years. In fact, one of my principals presented at the South Carolina Association of School Administration Leadership Conference talking about our policy in Fairfield County. So we recognized that cell phones were an issue, and we implemented a policy to address that issue. Now, some people say, well, JR, if you put a policy in place, why do you disagree with the state superintendent doing it across the state?
Well, wait a minute, JR. Let me make sure, because I think everyone needs to make certain that they understand what you just said.
Okay.
As superintendent of Fairfield County, and as authorized by your board, a policy was in fact put in place to address the issue of cell phones in schools with students.
Exactly.
Which is exactly how it should be done. So in other words, there was no far-reaching authority to come in and say, this is what must be done, and if you do not do it, you won't receive any funding. But go ahead.
Well, and so, and I'll tell you, and I've not spoken to the high school principal in Fairfield yet, but I'm curious to hear her perspective. The policy in Fairfield up until this point has been students can't have access to their phones during instructional time. And so you can have your phone at lunchtime, you can have your phone before school, you can have your phone after school, you can have your phone in the hallways. But just not during instructional time. And it has worked like a charm in Fairfield. And so my issue is now, due to the fact that state superintendent has pushed for the statewide policy that says it has to be bell to bell, now we'll have to change a policy that has been working fine.
Right.
And now we have to go to a policy where students can't even have their phones at lunchtime. And I'm going to make a prediction, Greg,
I already know
that you are going to start to see discipline increase during lunchtime all across the state of South Carolina.
Now, wait a minute now, because if I'm correct, part of what was just passed says that there has to be, policies put in place that do not impact students to the degree where it would lead to them being out of school, i.e. out of school or in school suspension. Now, of course, initially, I believe once you put something in place, you have to have a consequence for it. And the consequences range from anywhere from as simple as a verbal warning all the way through an out of school recommendation for expulsion. That's a continuum, correct? Exactly. So I'm curious as to how school districts are going to put something in place that will start and stop short of in-school and out-of-school suspension. And I don't think it can be done.
Dr. McCoy, can I just add this to it? Don't we as African-American people become affected disproportionately in situations like that when the discipline is injected into that equation?
Well, and I want to be clear, Greg, I was not even talking about discipline relative to a violation of the cell phone policy. I was talking about discipline relative to everything else that goes on in high school settings. You know, if you walk into a high school at lunchtime right now and you see hundreds of young people on their cell phones, those are hundreds of young people who are actively engaged in some kind of activity who aren't necessarily considering any mischief. And I use the term that idle mind is the devil's workshop. And I'll tell you, just like if you go to and look at bus discipline is considerably down now relative to where it was before we had cell phones. And you say, well, why is that the case? Well, now you have young people who may spend their time on the bus playing games, watching movies, on YouTube, doing something other than getting into mischief. When you take out the opportunity for young people to be have their minds occupied doing something that engages them, then they will find something else to do. And so those young people who may have once been watching a movie or on YouTube or doing something else that didn't negatively impact anyone, now you take that away, what are they going to be doing? And so we assume that they're just going to be engaged in some positive activity and discussing Algebra 1 and the Great Conquest. But I'm here to tell you, in many instances, my prediction is that will not be the case. Just as if you decided we were going to extend that policy to buses, you would see discipline on buses immediately go up.
Now, I don't know if I'm going to agree with you wholesale on that, just simply because I also know that cell phones are used and can be the root of most of the transgressions that take place in school, as it relates to bullying, as it relates to cyberbullying, as it relates to recording things that they necessarily shouldn't be recording. So I can't tell you that wholesale. I believe that I have an issue with cell phones. I have an issue, however, with someone telling me how I am to govern my district or my school.
And Greg, I have issues with both. And so I'll tell you, I don't doubt that you have issues. I've seen it as well, where young people have sent an Instagram post or did something and used their cell phone in a
situation that gets out of control, just like that,
in a negative manner. But I'll tell you, I think what you'll find is you have many more young people who don't use it for those negative reasons than who do. And so now you are going to, in essence, cause everyone to lose a resource that occupies them in a positive manner. So I think time will tell, but that I had this conversation with one of our former colleagues, and he said he questioned whether my prediction would come to pass, and I hope I'm wrong. I hope we don't see an uptick in discipline as a function of this policy, but that is my prediction.
Well, you know you will, and it may not be necessarily tied directly to cell phones, and here's what I mean by that. Many times it's all about how things are worded and coded. So it may start off as simple as a cell phone violation, but when I ask you to put your cell phone away and you refuse, it leaves the cell phone violation. It becomes refusal to obey. And then when you refuse to give it to me and you give me a little extra lip smack, well, now it becomes disrespect to authority. So I don't necessarily think you'll see an uptick as it relates to specifically cell phones, but to issues that resulted as the nexus of the cell phone that will result to kids being placed out of school, in school, out of school, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I want to go back to when you talk about frustrations for educators and teachers, I think teachers are going to get equally as frustrated about this as they are and were with the clothing issue.
I see.
I don't know if you recall, JR, there was a time when there was a lot of talk and commentary about what students should be wearing to schools. And if you go to some schools, they don't monitor it at all. I happen to be out of education, but I'm still in education to some degree. And the dress code is almost non-existent now. And I think that's because of some of the unintended consequences that came along with trying to have these do or die, one way only policies that place students and adults at odds.
Well, Greg, what I'll say is I don't think, and first of all, let me tell you, if you were to survey teachers in Fairfield County, they would tell you.
Well, not Fairfield. We got to get outside of Fairfield.
Well, but I can only tell you my experience.
Yeah.
So I'm just telling you. I'm just telling you. Well, I can't speak to what's going on in Beaufort or Greenville or Charleston.
Okay.
I can just tell you what's going on in Fairfield. At least up until June 30th, I can tell you that. But I think most of them would tell you that they felt our cell phone policy worked great. It addressed the issue at hand, which was being a distraction during the instructional day. Rather, young people use their phones at lunchtime or in the hallway or in between. I don't think most teachers really cared about that. I think most teachers just did not want the distraction in their classroom.
I agree. I agree.
When I hear people say that teachers are excited about the new policy, I think teachers are excited about young people not having access to phones during instructional time.
But, JR,
I don't think anyone is excited about kids not having access to phones at lunch.
So I want to go back, and I'm going to interrupt you, because when you say teachers are excited, again, and I'm going to take it all the way down, as a classroom teacher, I remember my days in the classroom. I ran my classroom. My best teachers always run their classrooms. So I don't need and didn't need for some authority to come in and tell me that students shouldn't be up, students shouldn't be talking. We didn't have cell phones back then, by the way. I'm a little older. But I monitored my classrooms and my students in my classrooms. I just don't think today's teachers are quite built that way.
Well, I disagree. I disagree.
Well, I mean, you can disagree because you're speaking from a perspective of.
I disagree. What I tell you, Greg, I think some of the best teachers still had struggles with young people's addiction to cell phones. And I want to use I want to use the term addiction to cell phones.
But if you say addiction, then you can't stop with students, because you might as well take it on up to the adults, because they're equally as addicted to cell phones as young people. But we won't get into that.
Yeah, let's not get into that.
Let me go back to what I was saying a moment ago.
Can I have you both on my show?
I want to go back to this part right here about classroom teachers.
Are we going to talk about book bans?
I think classroom teachers are doing the very best that they can every day, day in and day out. Mm-hmm. Anything extra we put on the plate for them to have to monitor, I think it's going to
it feels disrespectful.
Well, I don't know if I say disrespectful. I think it's going to further pull them away from what they got into teaching for.
Sure.
And that is to teach.
Sure.
Would you agree with that?
Well, I'm going to say once again, Greg, I think administration obviously has a role to create the kind of culture where teachers can experience success with young people. I think a policy such as what we did in Fairfield, which said that all young people had to separate from their cell phones. And let me tell you, the way it worked in Fairfield was either you had to put your phone in the yonder pouch, or you are basically saying, I don't have a phone to put in the yonder pouch.
What's the consequence?
Because the consequences were very severe. I think the first offense may have been a parent conference. I think the second offense may have been a 3-day suspension, and maybe the third out of school suspension. Man, and I'll tell you, you could probably count on one hand the number of students that got out of school suspensions due to cell phones.
So let me ask you this question.
You can count on one hand.
And I think this is where, again, I go back to my ultimate point when I say I don't think you necessarily have to have someone come in and tell you how to run your affairs. I think what we've gotten away from with young people, which is so important, and by the way, a young person taught me this, explaining the why. Explaining the why we're being asked to do something. When I grew up, and for some of those that are in my age category, when we grew up, why should I do it? Because I said so. And that was it. That's all you needed. You can't do that with today's young people. Explaining why something is being asked of them and giving detail as to what you hope the outcome will be makes a difference.
Sure.
And I think that's what good teaching is all about. I think when you go in the best teachers' classrooms, they spend a lot of time talking to young people about the whys. Not the X's and O's, but the whys.
Greg, I can take you into classrooms with some of the most dynamic teachers I've known in my career, teachers who have been around for 35 and 40 years, and they will tell you without exception, we appreciate a policy where we have the administration support relative to cell phone. Mm-hmm. So I disagree.
Well, I disagree. Totally
well, if you're telling me
administrative support, so you're saying administrators wouldn't put a policy in place that would support teachers?
What I'm telling you is, when we put a policy in place, that everyone had to put your phone in a yonder pouch, or basically a test you don't have a phone. So if you pull a phone out, that's automatically a referral. There's not a conversation about, well, I just wanted to look at this, or I just wanted. If you have a phone out in class, it's automatically a referral, and administration is going to deal with it accordingly.
Sounds like you had zero tolerance.
Zero tolerance. And teachers appreciated that. I think it is unfair to say if you are a good teacher, you'll be able to navigate the cell phone issues on y'all.
That's not quite what I
that's
said.
kinda
What I
heard.
said was, and I know
We
you
get
always
it.
hear things differently
We
than what
get
I
it,
said.
though. We get
What
it,
I
though. Our
said
audience
was
got it, too.
some of the best teachers.
I'm talking the best.
And JR, let me make sure I make this perfectly clear. Again, I support anything that's going to give us an opportunity to have uninterrupted instruction in classrooms. I do not support wholeheartedly anything that's going to place us in a situation where we have to met out consequences for students that will place them out of school. When a kid is not in school, there's no instruction that takes place. Now, you said a handful of kids.
Exactly.
I can't argue with that because I don't have your data in front of me. But I can tell you this. I can tell you that at the end of this year, when they sort out the discipline and the consequences for this policy, it's going to disproportionately impact students that need to be in school the most.
But Greg, I want to highlight a tremendous difference between what happened in Fairfield and this policy. And I want you to think about it through the psyche of a young person. A young person is much more apt to adhere to the policy of not having a cell phone during class when he or she knows I'll have access to my cell phone right after this block ends. I have access to my cell phone at lunchtime. They know access eventually is coming. So they are much more apt to abide by the policy. It's a different mindset. If you tell a young person, when you come on campus at 8 o'clock, you aren't going to have access to your phone until 3:30. Okay? And I think what happens is they will probably be much more likely to push the envelope. So in Fairfield, it became a part of the culture very quickly. And students accepted it. Parents accepted it. Because you can make the argument, hey, you telling me you can't wait until class ends? You telling me you can't wait until lunchtime? And I don't think any parent's going to argue that point.
And here's my thought about it. Again, when you talk about a Fairfield, and when I say you have to get beyond Fairfield, because Fairfield is a small, close-knit community, right? And so I say that only to say and suggest this: more people, more issues, more conversations need to be had. At the end of the day, I think it's going to prove to be something that's not going to be as positive as we would like for it to be until or unless we get to the position where we can explain to students why these policies are being put in place.
And Greg, I know you want to move on. I don't want this point to go missing. Even if it's positive, even if it is a tremendous success, my position still remains: Greenville, that's your decision what you want to do with the students of Greenville.
Oh, yes. That's
Charleston,
where we started.
that's your decision.
That's where we started.
Richland 1, that's your decision. So my position is not based on whether it's going to be successful or not. My position is based on the fact that you have elected local leaders who are supposed to craft education policy, and you should do what you and your leaders and your community think is best for your community.
They say all politics are local. And so if that's the case, why are so many sitting silent? Because this isn't the only issue, and we don't have time to go into other issues that are being brought up. I heard you, Cynthia, mention book bans.
You'll have to talk about it on another
why are so many in communities sitting idly by? And I'm not just saying those in the community. I'm speaking directly to school boards associations. I'm speaking directly to any association that is centered around standing up for local government, being able to be run by local government. Why are so many people sitting idly by and just letting the State Department of Education run?
So Greg, I'm going to say something that may surprise people.
Well, it's going to surprise me.
Yeah, it's probably going to surprise you as well.
Hey, whoa. Wait a minute. No, we better get ready to close up. No, we better get ready to close up and save that for another show, because I'm going to tell you something now. When you start talking about superintendents and lacking courage, then you have to be ready to back that up. And
okay.
I don't think you're going to be able to fully do that in the next couple minutes.
I'll back it up right now.
Okay.
So if a superintendent currently says, I think that it is a great policy, and I have read of some who've said, I think it's a great policy. My question is, if you thought it was a great policy, why didn't you do it?
Oh, boy, that's a tough one right there.
If you thought it was a great policy that students shouldn't have access to cell phones during the instructional day, you didn't need to wait for the state superintendent to do it. And let me follow this up by saying,
But
I
what
have
about the
been
school boards?
told, and I can't verify that this is the truth, that there have been some who have said to State Superintendent Ellen Weaver, we would like the policy to be in place, but we don't necessarily want the backlash that we'll get from our community if we do it, so we would prefer that you do it.
So you're saying superintendents looked out to the state superintendent. They went past their boards, which, by the way, boards set policy, right? They have 3 jobs: set policy, balance the budget, hire and fire superintendent. So you're telling me boards, local boards, didn't have the insight? Is that what you're telling me?
Boards didn't have the insight or the will to do it.
All right.
Remember, boards are elected bodies. And so when boards put policies in place that upset the community, they may become unelected. And so in many instances, boards may say, you know what, I think it is a good policy to pursue,
let me tell you
but
something.
this may lead to my defeat, therefore I'm not going to pursue it.
Boy, I'm glad you're not working anymore. I'm glad because you might have a call to come and see somebody tomorrow morning. Once this airs, I'm glad you're not working anymore, but this is exactly...
I don't know why you said that.
This is exactly why I wanted to start my inaugural show off with someone that can spark a little controversy, so to speak. Also, when I say controversy, I tend to be one to believe that controversy is good. Controversy is good because it brings about conversations. Sometimes it brings about confusion. Sometimes it brings about chaos. But at least we know what it is that we're talking about. And I hope that we'll be able to have other guests on this show and other topics that will be similarly related to not just education, but other things that people find to be topical and important. And we'll also delve into some areas that I consider to be adult-only content. But before we ever get to that, this is going to be our core. And so, Cynthia, you seem to have always been a natural at keeping a knack or having a knack for finding out what needs to be discussed. What leads you into your topics for conversation each week?
I look at what people are talking about, and then I try to see how do I take that to another level. Especially if I see something happening on the national level, I like to drill down so that people can see how it affects us in our region, in our state, in our city. They're more apt to continue to tune in if you make it relevant to them. And so I just pay attention, to what's happening all around. And I put a good team together. I've got a great producer in Celeste Cannon. Dexter Stroman's an awesome associate producer, and Nita Brown is an awesome engineer. And we're in the studio every Sunday with the radio show, and then, of course, over at Watch Fox on Sunday mornings with the television show, and it seems to work well. But I think that just keeping your finger on the pulse of what's happening, and then knowing great people to call in or to come in with you to have these discussions. I look forward to following your podcast, and
we look forward to having you back, at some point in time, and let us know how we're doing. And again, Dr. J.R. Green, thank you for being here, because again,
my pleasure.
Without someone like you in my background, I don't know how courageous I would have been in saying, hey, I want to try it. Some people say, hey, why start a podcast? Why start it now? A couple of reasons. One, because I can.
That's
and
right,
what I mean by that is I'm still able to get out and be relevant in today's market. But then two, because I still believe I have something to offer, not necessarily from me, but through me. And so as I bring in guests that can help us put people in a place where they can speak intelligently,
yes, sir,
out and about in the communities
absolutely,
where they live, I think that makes a difference. And most importantly, I want people to know when I say communities, I'm not talking about South Carolina based. I'm hoping this to go as far out as what's that place called? Bluefoot, Montana. I want people calling in and sending in responses from wherever they are, because I want it to be coming from a common man's perspective. I'm a common man. At the end of the day, minus all the degrees, I'm a common man, and that's all I'll ever be. Before I close out, I'd like to give props to Brother J.R. Green. He has a #1 best-selling book. JR, you want to tell them that real quick?
Graveyard to Blooming Garden. Check it out. It's about our transformational journey in Fairfield County during my 12-year tenure. You can get it at BookBaby, Amazon. Go to my website, jr-green.com, where we offer a multitude of consulting services as well. So check out the website.
Follow us on all social media sites, Live and Direct with Dr. G. That's going to be Spotify, Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat. Yes, we are doing Snapchat, TikTok, et cetera, et cetera. So again, thank you all for this first show, and we look forward to coming back to you next week.